So we're going to talk about Greek theater today, kind of the origins, the theater itself, and a few other things. So let's kind of get right to it. So Greek theater. So first off, let me explain that we are aware of over 1,000 plays. Some of these are because we have fragments of them, some because we have the full play, and some of these we just have comments, like somebody wrote about the play from the 5th century in Athens. Of those over 1,000 plays, we have about 30 full-length plays remaining. So if you're a math person, that's 3%. So anytime any teacher, including myself, ever mentions what we know about Greek theater and Greek plays, we know about 3% of Greek theater, 3 plays. This is like if you have a favorite album and you played about 2 seconds of one song from it and said, I think this album is like this. So keep everything with a grain of salt. That we really don't know that much about Greek theater. What we really know is we know a lot about the 3% of Greek theater that we have. So let's talk about what we do know. All right, so the origins of Greek theater and theater itself comes from religious practices. The Greeks dedicated a lot of theater to the Greek god Dionysus. Dionysus was a god of wine, of partying, of theater, and of kind of insanity. So if you ever think of crazy theater people, it's inherently part of our culture. We are based on the insane god. And every year in Athens, they would hold this big contest that was called the City Dionysus, in which the city would dedicate itself to Dionysus and dedicate itself to theater. And there was a number of playwrights that would get together and they would create multiple plays and they would do this big giant festival and people would watch it and decide who the best playwright was of the year. And so generally speaking, as we understand it, it was 3 playwrights competing with 4 different plays. The first 3 were known as tragedies. The last one was called a satyr play. They were sometimes, based on what we have of them, it seems like they were either based on one story or one theme. So, for example, we know that sometimes they would be based all about one myth. So there is a story that's called the Oedipus story. We're going to talk about Oedipus later on. If you've ever read Antigone, Antigone is part of the Oedipus story. And Aeschylus wrote a group of plays called Laus, which is the father of Oedipus. I can't remember what the play was called that was in between it. Then there was a play called Seven Against Thebes, which was about the sons of Oedipus. And then the final play he wrote one year was called The Sphinx, which is a reference to what Oedipus fights. Now, of those plays, even though I can't remember the 4th title, we only have one of them. We only have the Seven Against Thebes. So the titles seem to suggest that it was all one big giant story, all this kind of Oedipus-based stories. But are they direct sequels to each other, or are they simply plays inspired by Oedipus? Is it a group of plays that all tell one big story, or is it a one big theme, which was Oedipus? That we don't know. And so then the 3 plays would play, and then, as I understand it, would be 3 plays one day, 3 plays another day, 3 plays the 3rd day, and then the final day, it was just the satyr plays, which were tended to be shorter and just for comic relief, which is where, by the way, we get the word satire. So satyr plays were comedic plays. Then tragedies, which were the main plays, were formulated from religious songs. So it starts with choral numbers. Choral odes were songs to be sung by a chorus, like literally the way that we have them in the modern church today. And then at some point, one person stepped out of the crowd and started speaking to the audience. Sometimes that person would pretend to be an actual god. Sometimes they were like a priest. Sometimes they became a character. And this became the original first version of plays as we kind of recognize them as that. So the original tragedies were these religious songs with actors kind of talking to the audience, talking to the singers, and that set the tone for all of them. And many tragedies seem to have a serious tone, at least based on the ones that we've seen. Keep in mind, only 3%. But what we do know is that tragedy did not necessarily mean a sad ending. Tragedy was a reference to the medium. The play or the film or the book is a medium. Tragedy was what they called a play. Just to give a sense of it, just because we're watching a movie doesn't mean it's going to be a sad movie or an action movie or any of these other things. So there's no content to tragedy yet. The word tragedy was technically, in Greek, it was tragoidia, which literally means tragoidia, or goat song or song of the goats. No one really knows why. The thought process is that might have been possibly a connection to Dionysus, because the satyr, which was kind of this half man, half goat, was connected to Dionysus, so that might have been it. The goat was a animal that people saw a lot, oftentimes a crazy little goat. If you've ever seen like cute little goats jumping around in videos on the internet, goats are sometimes just like weird animals. And then also goats, frankly, were possibly just a prize. It's possible that the prize of winning a good play was getting a goat. We simply don't know. We don't know where that song of the goat really comes from, but that is what the words technically mean, goat songs. The original actor was called a hypocrite. It meant someone who replies or speaks. But I suppose because an actor is not a truth teller, you're playing a part, not who you are. So maybe that's where the word hypocrite goes from actor to somebody who says one thing but does another. The original actor was called a protagonist. That was the first tagonist. Then there was somebody called the deuteragonist, because originally it was just one guy talking to the crowd with like a chorus behind him. Then they realized they were limited on what kind of stories they could tell, so they decided to add a second actor. So the deuteragonist became the second actor. And then eventually, by the time you get to Antigone and Oedipus, Sophocles had added a third actor, and that was the tritagonist. Modern ways we use the protagonist is as our main character in a book, and like the antagonist is like the main villain. They wouldn't have known what an antagonist was. The protagonist to the Greeks would have been the lead or the first person they see. So Oedipus and Oedipus, or Antigone and Antigone, that would have been the protagonist, as the lead actor. The plots tended to be serious based on the 3% we have, almost always having an unhappy ending due to the character's tragic flaw. This was called harmatia. The idea was that characters had to have a flaw. And this is an idea that we still have to this present day. That very rarely do you see characters who are morally perfect, because I don't think many people can understand perfection. We can understand flaws because we are flawed humans. It's just, what is our flaw? And the most common version of that tragic flaw was called hubris, which is ultimately arrogance and pride. So it's a pride that goes beyond a certain amount and eventually leads to somebody's downfall. The structure of the Greek play is almost always just like this, which is a prologue in which one or two characters come out before the chorus appears and gives some background information. Even if they already know, based on, the audience would have come to Oedipus knowing the Oedipus story, what they don't know is where in the story are we in that story. So the prologue's job was to give that information somehow. Then the parados, which is where we get our word parade from, is the entrance of the chorus. So the chorus coming in, doing its big song and dance, And then there would be episodes or scenes, which were kind of the main action, and odes, which were chorus-run reflections of what was going on. So that instead of having the scenes end because of a blackout or a curtain closing, the scenes end when the chorus starts to sing. So when the chorus sings, you know that the scene is over and we're moving into another scene. And so in the chorus, you would have a leader of the chorus, which was called the choreagos, and then you had the chorus itself, which was a bunch of singers and dancers. The songs were set up in what's called a strophe, which is a movement from right to left. And it was basically setting up an idea. And then the antistrophe, which is the reaction to that, moving from left to right. So if you're doing your choral odes, if you want to think about right to left and then left to right, that was the big things. Sophocles, who's the playwright we're going to focus on, he was one of the big playwrights. There were three really big ones, and he is our second really big one. There was Aeschylus before him, and so he is known best for writing about Oedipus. So eventually you guys are going to take a look at some of Oedipus. He also wrote Antigone, which if you are in 10th grade, you might have gotten to do a little bit of Antigone. He lived 496 to about 406 BC. He was famous for adding the third actor, and he won a number of prizes in his life. We know he came first in these competitions at City Dionysus. He was also an important person, a political figure in the city of Athens, and he was some form of military man. We're not exactly sure what the military man was, but we do know he was in the military. And here's the theater, and we're going to kind of look at the theater, and this is where we're going to stop. So the theater consists of the theatron, which is the sitting place, and this is a large area where people would sit. Then there would be a small little area in the front, the orchestra, and there would be some sort of religious statue right in the middle. That's what this thing right here is, the theme. Behind it, you'd see the skene, or the stage, and in front of the stage was the proscenium, which is where we get the term proscenium arch. So in a normal theater, that big, gigantic frame that kind of goes over the edge of the stage, where you have like the wall. If you can think about Riverside's theater, there's a podium right next to a brick wall. That brick wall going up, going over where the screen comes down, all that is called a proscenium frame or a proscenium arch. This goes all the way back to here. So we're going to take a look at some of these. So, whoops, let me actually zoom in on this one. That is a very, very old Greek theater. So you have the orchestra here, you got the theatron here, and this is just a little bit of, you can barely see the proscenium and the skene off to the side. And so what you'll see from this is, first off, there's a huge, gigantic amount of space here. Thousands of people could sit at these theaters. You can see how small these people are from this seat. So the theater style, the acting style of this time period was not simple. It wasn't subtle. It had to be larger than life, because they can only really see this one person here. That's why they use so many things like a chorus of about 30 people singing and dancing, moving as one, because they could see that really well. It's also why they started doing stuff like wear masks. So I put a large mask on, and the mask's facial features would be really larger than life so that you could see it. The mask also had a little funnel at the front of the mask that would push out the words and act kind of like a megaphone, so that you'd have this mask on and it would help you project in this extremely large space. So they were generally built on the side of like mountains. They would take advantage of the sloping hillsides that they often had, and then they would place these right here. you can yet again see just the structure of the skene behind them, the building that would have involved various structures and levels. And the audience sat in the theatron, which was the seeing place. And here's a close-up of some of the actual seats that exist in a Greek theater. Notice the detail, not comfortable, but still highly detailed. And so it's about 55 circular rows that could hold about 12 to 14,000 people. That is a lot of people. So this is what I was saying before, the detailed masks and costumes, really bright colors, so that they could see the actors and notice the movements. And so this is a pretty good representation of what a Greek chorus might have looked like. You can almost see the kind of the opening for the mouth is going to act as a funnel to produce words coming out. And the colors of the costumes were often like bright colored so that people could literally see them. And so the choreographer would kind of interact. He was the head character, and eventually the writers started giving the head chorus member actual lines. So in many ways he became a fourth actor. And so the job of the chorus was to kind of set ethical standards so that the audience, who was supposed to be equal to the chorus is generally like the average citizen, gives you a sense of what you should be thinking about. They give advice to the characters, and they react as if the audience would react. And it also gives a pause or break in the action, because as you can see from those big theaters, there's no place for a curtain. They didn't have lighting equipment, so they didn't have any other way to do it except for to create some sort of symbol of when their scene's over. So I hope this gives you an idea of how sort of Greek theater works, and will help you in the future. I hope you guys are doing well, and hopefully I will see you before the end of the year. Sorry I've been out so long. Not intentional, just taking longer to heal up this leg than I thought it would. Alright, take care guys.